The man who raised a hand to a horse did it slowly, the way a man does a thing he is sure no one will stop, and that slowness is the part I have never been able to forget. I have stood the forecourt of Marrowgate for 11 years, and I have seen men do foolish things to my fellow soldiers and walk away laughing. But this was the first time I watched a grown man choose, with all the time in the world to choose otherwise, to frighten an animal that could not run and could not answer, and the first time I understood that the worst cruelty is not the loud kind. It is the patient kind. It is the kind that waits for a camera to be ready. His name, I learned later, was Calder Voss, though to me on that morning he was only the man in the pale linen jacket who had been circling the carriage line for 10 minutes like a buyer at a fair. I am Sergeant Tobias Wren, and I was the dismounted file leader that day, posted 3 paces off the offside wheel of the state landau, while my section held the forecourt for the late morning carriage drill. And the horse, I should tell you about the horse first, because she is the heart of this, and because she never once got the chance to tell it herself. Her name was Bellwether, a gray mare, 16 hands, 11 years in the royal stable and 9 of them at the head of the ceremonial pair, which is a way of saying she had stood through more noise than most soldiers ever will. Cannon, bands, 10,000 phones, children shrieking on their father's shoulders. She had a white blaze and 1 dark forefoot, and a temperament the stable master called Old Church, meaning she was steady the way old stone is steady, the way a thing is steady when it has decided long ago that the world is loud and that this is no reason to come apart. We trusted her at the front of the pair precisely because nothing moved her. That, it turns out, is also why a certain kind of man cannot leave her alone. Voss had started gently, as that kind always does, a wave of the hand near her eye, a clap. He filmed it on a phone held low against his hip, the way a man films a thing he already knows he should not be doing. When she did not flinch, he stepped closer to the rope and tried the noises, a sharp hiss between his teeth, a stamp of his polished shoe on the cobble, and still she stood, ears working, 1 back hoof cocked at rest, giving him exactly the nothing she had given the cannon for 9 years. I watched all of it. That is the part people never understand about the post. They think the stillness means we are switched off, that the eyes-forward stare is a man somewhere far away inside his own head. It is the opposite. I saw every step he took toward that horse, and I read each one the way I have been trained to read them. Not by the face lies, but by the hands and the feet and the small, clean line of intention a man draws across the ground when he has decided to do a thing and is only waiting for the courage or the audience to do it. He had the audience. That was the trouble. A loose crowd had thickened along the gilded rope, the way a crowd does around any small drama, and a half-dozen of them had their phones up now, and Voss could feel them the way a poor actor feels a house. I have seen it 100 times. The man playing to the rope is twice as dangerous as the man who came to make trouble in private, because the private man can be embarrassed into stopping and the public man cannot. The rope was his stage, the horse was his prop, and a prop that will not react must, in the mind of a man like that, simply be pushed until it does. "She's fake," he said loud to the phones. "Look at her, they drug them. That's not a real animal, that's a statue with a tail." He laughed at his own line, and a few along the rope laughed with him because a crowd will laugh at almost anything if you say it with enough confidence. Watch this. I'll wake her up." That was the sentence. I want you to sit with that sentence the way I have sat with it. I'll wake her up. A man stood in front of a creature 10 times his weight and 100 times his patience, a creature that had done nothing to him and could do nothing to him, and decided that her calm was an insult he was owed the ending of. There is a name for the thing that makes a man feel that way, and it is not bravery and it is not fun, whatever he told the rope. It is the small, cold hunger of a person who has never in his life been refused, looking at the one thing in the courtyard that will not perform for him, and needing to make it break. He bent and picked up something from the base of the rope post. I could not see what it was at first. Then the light caught it, and I saw it was a child's lost umbrella, a little folded thing, bright and cheap, and he opened it with a single hard snap an arm's length from Bellwether's face. I felt the whole section go tight around me, without a word passing. An open umbrella is, to a horse, not an umbrella. It is a thing that was small and is suddenly large, that was still and is suddenly moving, that has appeared from nowhere directly at the one place a horse's eye most fears a thing to appear. It is, in the oldest part of an animal that has been prey for 1,000,000 years, the shape of a predator unfolding its wings. There is no training that fully erases that. There is only a steady creature deciding, every single time, to override 1,000,000 years of instinct, because a man it trusts has taught it that the world, however loud, will not actually eat it. Bellwether did not bolt. I will tell you that now, so you do not spend the next minutes afraid for her the way I was. She was old church to the last. Her head went up and back. Her eyes rolled white at the edges. A long shudder ran down her flank like wind across water. But her feet stayed where the stable and 9 years had taught them to stay, and the great muscle of her did the thing that the great muscle of a disciplined creature does, which is to hold against its own terror, because something in it has decided that holding is who it is. She did exactly what we do. That is what undid me watching it. She stood her post. And the man, seeing the white eye and the shudder, hearing the small frightened gust of breath through her nostrils, the man got what he came for, and he wanted more. There she is, Voss crowed to the rope. He snapped the umbrella shut and open again closer. There's the real horse. Come on, you stupid animal. He raised his free hand, the flat of it, to strike her across the muzzle. And I came off my post. Now I want to be precise about what coming off a post means, because the whole of what follows turns on it, and because a man who does not understand it will think I simply ran across a courtyard and grabbed a fool by the wrist, which is not what happened and is not what we are trained to do. A sentry does not abandon his ground for an insult. He does not abandon it for noise or mockery or a man's hand laid on his own person. I have stood and taken all three and stayed where I was placed, because the post is a trust, and the cheapest way to lose it is to let a small man's bad afternoon decide where a soldier stands. But the rules that hold me to my ground are not a cage. They are a set of standing orders, and the oldest of them, older than the courtyard and older than the regiment, is the one that says a guardsman may break his post to prevent grievous harm. The breathless child, the man falling at the rail, and though I had never once in 11 years had cause to test it, a defenseless animal in the royal charge about to be struck in the face by a stranger's hand. So I did not run. I want that understood. I moved the way the drill teaches a man to move when the moving has to be exactly right, or it will make things worse fast, but flat. No sudden mass thrown toward a frightened horse, my rifle coming up across my chest to the port not as a weapon but as a barrier, a clean horizontal line of held wood, and steel that I could put between that descending hand and that gray muzzle without ever swinging it at the man at all. 5 strides. I have counted them since, lying awake. 5 strides, and the most important thing I did in all 5 was not look at Voss. I looked at the horse. You cannot calm an animal you are not attending to, and an animal that is already over its threshold will read a stranger sprinting toward it as one more predator in a bad morning. And the worst thing I could have done, the thing that would have turned a frightened butt-holding mare into a half-ton of bolting panic in a crowd, was to come at her hard and shouting. So I came in low and angled off her shoulder where she could see me, my voice already going before my body arrived, low and flat and tuneless, the one long word the stable uses, the word that means nothing and means everything. Easy. Easy, old girl. Easy. And I put the rifle up between Voss's hand and Bellwether's face, and his palm met the smooth wood of it instead of her, and the slap that was meant for a horse landed on a guardsman's weapon held by a guardsman's 2 gloved hands, and stopped there. Stopped dead. the way every wrong thing in that courtyard was about to stop. He stumbled back a half step, more from surprise than force, because I had not pushed him. I had only refused to let his hand arrive where it was going. For one long second the whole forecourt held its breath. The rope, the phones, the section frozen at their posts, the great gray mare trembling and wide-eyed and held, and a man in a pale linen jacket staring at me with the particular outraged face of a person who has, for the very first time in living memory, been told no. "Do you know who I am?" he said. I have heard that sentence many times. It is, in my experience, the truest thing a certain kind of man ever says, because the answer he is fishing for and the answer the day is about to give him are the same answer, and it is, "No one who matters here." But I did not say that. I did not say anything to him at all. I had a frightened horse a hand's width from my shoulder, and a horse in that state does not care about a man's dignity or a man's law, and the only thing in the whole courtyard that mattered to me in that moment was bringing her down off the ledge he had walked her out onto. So I gave him my back. That is the part the rope remembered longest. I have seen it in the footage since. The sergeant who turned his shoulder on the shouting man as though the shouting man were weather, and put both hands and all his attention on the animal. I ran my gloved palm flat down the great muscle of her neck, slow, the same stroke every time, no surprises, and I kept the low word going under my breath like a current, and I let her feel through my glove and my voice and the steady line of my body, the one thing she had been built her whole life to take comfort from, and that the man had spent 10 minutes trying to steal. That something near her was not afraid, and was not going anywhere, and would stand between her and the unfolding thing for exactly as long as it took. Her head came down by inches, the white went out of her eye. The long shudder traveled down her flank one last time and ran out into the cobbles like the last of a wave, and she blew, hard, through her nose, the great gusting sigh a horse gives when it has decided to come back down into the world, and she pressed her broad cheek against my chest the way she had been doing to her handlers since she was a foal, and stood. 8 seconds, perhaps 9. I have spent the discipline of a whole career, the polishing and the drilling and the standing in the cold, and I have spent it in stretches like that 8 seconds when there was no time to go and find it. That is what it is for, not to be looked at. For this. Behind me Voss was still talking. They always are. "That's assault," he was telling the rope, his voice climbing. "You all saw it. He came at me with a rifle. He assaulted me. Get that, are you getting that? RoyalGuard attacks tourist. That's the video, he was already, you understand, editing it in his head. Already cutting the 10 minutes of his own hand at a horse's face down to the 1 second of a soldier's rifle rising. Already certain, the way his kind is always certain, that the camera he had brought to catch a horse breaking would now catch a soldier breaking instead, and that the certainty of a confident man shouting into a phone is the same thing as the truth. It is not. I have learned that it is not the slow way more than once on that forecourt. But he did not know it yet, and the rope did not know it yet, and for the length of a held breath the lie ran out across the courtyard faster than anything true could follow. Then the gate opened, and the day began to turn. Lieutenant Aldous Marin came through it at a walk. That is the first thing anyone who knows the regiment will tell you about Marin, that whatever is happening, he comes at a walk, and that the walk is itself a kind of message. A man telling a courtyard with the plain speed of his own feet that nothing here is an emergency any longer, because the part of the institution that handles such things has now arrived and is not in a hurry. He had the stable master's lad at his shoulder and 2 of the section's relief at his back, and he came across the cobbles to me first, not to Voss, and that order mattered, and I think even Voss half felt that it mattered. "Sergeant Wren," he did not raise his voice, "is the mare hurt?" "No, sir," frightened, "she's down now, no hand landed on her." "And you?" "No, sir." "Good." He let the lad take bellwethers near rein, gentle, murmuring, and only when the horse was passed safely to a hand that knew her did the lieutenant turn the quarter turn that brought Voss into the front of his attention. And even then he did it without heat, the way you turn to consider a problem rather than a person. "Sir," he said to Voss, "you'll stand where you are, please." He assaulted me. Voss had his phone up now, openly, filming the lieutenant, and his voice had found the bright wounded register of a man who has decided to be the victim and means to hold the role against all evidence. "Your soldier came at me with a weapon. I'm a guest in this kingdom and I was filming the horses like everyone else, and he charged me with a gun. And I want his name and his number, and I want the police, because I am going to." "The police are already coming," Marin said. "I called them from the gatehouse." He let that sit for a moment, watching it fail to land the way Voss expected. "You misunderstand which of us wants them here. I will tell you that I did not feel in that moment the thing you might expect. I did not feel vindicated. A horse had just stood the worst 9 minutes of her gentle life, and I had a glove that still smelled of her fear. And the man who had done it was an arm's length away, calling himself the injured party to a phone. And there is no part of that which feels like winning, even when you know how it ends. What I felt, if you want the truth, was tired and a little sick and very glad of the rein in the lad's hand. The vindication, such as it was, did not come from me. It never does. It comes from the people who were watching, and from the small patient machinery of the law, and it comes. This is the part Voss did not know to be afraid of in its own time and not in his. Because here is what a man like Calder Voss never understands about a forecourt full of phones. He thinks the phones are his. He thinks the crowd is his audience, the way the rope was his stage and the horse his prop, and that the recording will say what he tells it to say. But a phone is only a lens, and a lens points whichever way the hand behind it chooses, and there were 40 hands on that rope that morning, and only one of them belonged to Voss. His own lens, held low against his hip, had been pointed at the horse for 10 minutes, which is to say it had been pointed, the whole time, at his own hand opening an umbrella in a mare's face, at his own voice saying, "I'll wake her up, and you stupid animal," at his own arm rising to strike. He had filmed the entire case against himself, and did not yet know he was carrying it in his pocket. They so often are. And the others. A young woman near the front had filmed the umbrella from the side. A father with a small boy on his shoulders had caught the whole of it from the moment Voss first leaned over the rope. And one man, I did not see him then, only learned of him after, a quiet older gentleman in a gray coat who had said nothing and laughed at none of Voss's lines, had stood at the corner of the rope and filmed, in a steady unbroken take, the open palm rising toward Bellwether's muzzle and the wood of my rifle arriving to stop it. He sent that footage to the constabulary himself before the police even reached the gate, with a single line, "I was there." The soldier protected the animal. The man tried to strike it. I am a veterinary surgeon of 30 years, and I will say so to anyone who asks. The lie ran fast. It always does. But the truth, it turns out, had brought 39 other cameras and a vet. The 2 constables, when they came, did the unhurried thing that the law does well when it is allowed to. They did not arrive shouting. They took Voss aside, and they took me aside, and they took the lieutenant's account and the stable master's, and they began, quietly, methodically, the way the slow machine works, to collect the recordings. And it was in the collecting that the morning's true shape began, finally, to show itself to the rope, because as the older constable moved along the line saying, "May I see what you filmed, sir? Thank you. And would you mind sending that to this number?" The people who had laughed at "I'll wake her up" began, one by one, to look at the little glowing rectangles in their own hands, and to see what they had actually caught, and to go quiet in a different way than they had gone quiet before. A crowd will laugh at cruelty when a confident man frames it as a joke. I have watched it happen, and it shames me on their behalf every time. But show that same crowd the cruelty plainly, with the joke stripped off. Show them the frame where the umbrella snaps open and the old mare's eye rolls white, and the laughter curdles into something else. something I have seen settle over a forecourt only a few times, the particular still horror of decent people realizing they stood and filmed and chuckled, while a man frightened a creature that could not run. Several of them came to the constable unasked. One young man, he could not have been 20, handed over his phone with his ears red and said, "I laughed at the start. I'm sorry. I didn't see what he was actually doing until just now. It's all on here." Everything he said. And the constable thanked him and did not absolve him, because that is not a constable's job, and the young man walked away into the crowd carrying the small, useful weight of having helped fix a thing he had, for a few bad minutes, been part of. Voss watched all of this happen. I will give him that. He was not a stupid man, only an empty one, and somewhere in the watching I saw the first crack run through the certainty he had walked into the courtyard wearing like the pale jacket. He had come to take something from a horse that would not give it, and he was beginning slowly to understand that he had instead given a great deal of himself away, on 40 cameras, in his own loud voice, for free. "This is a setup," he said to the constable, but his voice had lost the audience now, and a man like that has nothing left when the audience is gone. "She's a horse. It's a horse. You can't actually be." "Sir," the older constable said, not unkindly, "have you got somewhere I can sit you down? Because I'm going to need to caution you, and I'd rather do it without the gentleman with the small boy having to hear it." And the lieutenant, who had stood through all of it at his unhurried parade calm, turned his head a degree toward me and said, very low, just for the two of us, "Go and see to your horse, Sergeant. The law has this. It's better at it than we are, and it lasts longer." So I went to my horse. She was standing quiet under the gatehouse arch now, out of the eye of the crowd, the stable lad at her head and the stable master himself running practiced hands down each of her legs, feeling for the small hot places where a frightened animal hurts itself without knowing, the wrench of a held leg, the strain of a neck thrown back. There were none. She had not bolted. She had not so much as struck the cobble hard. She had stood her terror the way she had stood the cannon, and taken no harm but the fright itself, which a horse carries differently than a man does and lays down faster if you let it, and if there is a steady hand to help. I took off my right glove. We are not strictly to be seen with a glove off on the forecourt, but I was off the forecourt now, and the rule that mattered more was the older one, and I put my bare hand flat on her neck, on the warm gray of her, and I felt the last of the tremor still running deep in the great muscle of her, fainter and fainter, like a bell, a long time after it is struck. And she turned her head and put her broad soft nose against my chest and breathed me in slow, and I stood there in the cool of the arch and let her, and did not hurry her, and for a little while neither of us was a soldier or a symbol or a thing on 100 screens. We were just two creatures who had been frightened together and were now, by the grace of standing still long enough, no longer afraid. "She knew you came for her," the stable master said. He is a man of few words and fewer soft ones, and he did not look at me when he said it, kept running his thumb along her cannon bone. "They know, people think they don't, that they're too simple for it. They're not too simple, they're too honest. She'll not forget that a red coat put itself between her and that hand. 9 years she's given this place her steadiness for free. Today the place gave a little of it back." He straightened and patted her once on the shoulder hard, the way men who truly love animals touch them, with no sweetness in it at all. "You did right, Sergeant. You did the thing the post is actually for. The standing's only so you'll be there when the standing has to stop." I have turned that sentence over many times since, the way I turn over the slow rise of that man's hand. The standing's only so you'll be there, because that is the thing the crowd never sees and the Voss of the world can never understand, that the stillness they mock, the eyes forward, the man who will not flinch for a snapped umbrella or a shouted insult or a hand laid on his own person, is not a man who has stopped caring. He is a man who has banked it. Every hour of held stillness is discipline put by, saved against the one moment in 1,000 hours when it has to be spent all at once and spent exactly right. And a man who breaks his post for a jeer has nothing left in the bank when a horse's eye rolls white. The stillness is not the absence of the caring. The stillness is the caring kept loaded. What happened to Calder Voss, I can tell you plainly, because it is a matter of public record, and because the regiment was careful, as it always is, to let the law be the thing that answered him and not us. He was cautioned in the gatehouse, and he was charged, in the days that followed, with two things. The first was an offense under the law that protects animals from cruelty, and from causing them unnecessary fear and distress. And here the quiet older gentleman's steady footage, and Voss's own pocket recording, and the stable master's expert account of what an open umbrella does to a prey animal at arm's length, made the case very nearly close itself. The second charge was the one that surprised the rope, and I confess surprised me, until I understood the law's reasoning. In raising his hand against an animal in the royal charge, under the protection of a sentry on duty, and in the manner he did it, he had committed an offense against the public order the guard exists to keep. He had not, in the end, assaulted me. I had been very careful in those 5 flat strides, never to swing the rifle at the man, only ever to put it between his hand and the horse, and the footage showed that plainly, frame by frame, the barrier and not the blow. His claim that the soldier had attacked him died the moment. The first honest video reached the constabulary, and died again with every one that followed, and by the time his own lawyer had watched the 10 unbroken minutes from Voss's own phone, the claim was not made again. The clip he had dreamed of RoyalGuard attacks tourists did go up. Of course it did. His friends posted it, cut to the single second of my rifle rising, stripped of the umbrella and the white eye and the I'll wake her up, and for a day and a half it ran exactly as he had planned, and for a day and a half I was, to a few 100,000 strangers, a brute in a bearskin who had menaced a harmless visitor over nothing. The lie ran fast. I have stopped being surprised by how fast. What still surprises me, what I hold on to, is how completely it failed to last. Because the truth had 39 cameras and a vet, and the truth was patient, and the truth did not need to shout. The young woman posted her side angle of the umbrella. The father posted the whole of it from the beginning. A newspaper, doing the unglamorous work newspapers still sometimes do, laid the edited clip beside the unedited ones, and let any honest eye see in 10 seconds what had been cut away. And the quiet gentleman in the gray coat turned out to be exactly what his message said, a veterinary surgeon of 30 years, and when he was asked, he said so, calmly on the record, with the particular unanswerable weight of a man who has spent his whole life among frightened animals and knows precisely what he is looking at. That was not a man being attacked. That was an animal being protected. The soldier did the only right thing in the courtyard. Within 2 days, the clip that had named me a brute had been watched, in its full and honest length, by more people than ever saw the lie, and they were not watching a guard attack a tourist. They were watching a man open an umbrella in an old horse's face for a laugh, and a sergeant put himself between them, and a gray mare press her cheek against a red coat and come down off her fear. The thing went round the world in the end, but not the way Voss meant it to. It went round as the other story. It always was the other story. He had simply been the last to know which story he was in. He pleaded guilty in the end. I think his lawyer was a wiser man than his client and showed him the footage until the showing did its work. He was fined, a sum that, I am told, meant very little to a man of his means, and I confess I felt the old small frustration at that, the sense that money is a wall a certain kind of man hides behind from every consequence that should reach him. But the law had thought of that too, in its slow way, and the sentence was not only the fine. He was made the subject of an order barring him from keeping or being responsible for any animal for a term of years. And he was barred. This is the part the courtyard cared about, and the part I think reached him from the palace, its forecourt, and the whole length of the ceremonial route, for good. He had come to the most watched ground in the kingdom to make himself a moment of fame at a horse's expense. He left it having lost, permanently, the right to stand on it at all. He had wanted the rope to remember him, The rope will, not the way he hoped. I saw him once more, weeks later on the day of the hearing, in the cold stone corridor outside the courtroom where the public waits. He was a smaller man there than he had been on the forecourt. They always are, away from the rope and the phones and the borrowed boldness of a crowd. He looked at me, and I will not pretend I read remorse in his face, because I am not sure it was there, and I have learned not to award a man a virtue he has not earned just because the story would be tidier for it. But I read something. A man who had spent his life never once being refused had now been refused by an old horse, by a sergeant, by 40 strangers, by the law, and by the slow weight of a truth he could not edit, and the refusing had finally arrived somewhere in him. He did not say he was sorry. He said low, not quite to me, it was just a horse. And I said the only thing I have ever wanted to say to a man like that, the truest thing I know. And I said it quietly, with no rope to play to and no camera I cared about. No, it was never just a horse. It was a creature in our charge that trusted us not to let a man like you near it. That's the whole of what we're for. You spent 10 minutes finding out we meant it. Then I went back to Marrowgate, and I stood my post. Bellwether came back to the front of the pair within the week. The stable master watched her close those first few days, the way you watch any creature after a fright, for the small signs that the fear has gone in deep and stayed, the shy of the eye, the flinch at a raised hand, the lost steadiness that is the cruelest thing such a man leaves behind, longer lasting than any bruise. But she was old church. She came back to the head of the line on a bright cold morning with her white blaze high and her one dark forefoot sure on the cobble, and she stood the cannon and the band and the 10,000 phones exactly as she had stood them for 9 years, giving the loud world her steadiness for free, the way she always had, the way I hope she always will. A man had tried to take that from her for a laugh. He had not managed it. We had not let him. That, in the end, is the only sentence of the whole affair that I would carve in the stone if it were mine to carve. He tried, and we did not let him. People ask me sometimes, the ones who heard, who saw the footage go round, whether I was angry, whether in those 5 strides I wanted to do to Calder Voss what he was trying to do to my horse. And I tell them the truth, which is yes, for half of one of those strides I did. There is a thing that rises in a man when he sees cruelty offered to something that cannot defend itself, and it is not a gentle thing, and I would not trust a man who told me he had never felt it. But I will tell you what I tell them after that, because it is the thing I have given my life to, and the thing the whole of that morning was finally about. The strength of the regiment was never that we cannot be moved. A snapped umbrella moved a horse that had stood 100 cannon. A man can be moved, a horse can be moved, anything alive can be frightened by the right cruelty at the right moment. The strength is not that we cannot be moved. The strength is that we choose what moves us. A jeer does not. An insult does not. A hand laid on our own person does not. We will stand and take it and not give the small man the breaking he came for. But a frightened creature that trusted us, an open hand falling toward an eye that cannot run, that moves us, and is meant to, and the whole long discipline of the still face and the held line and the eyes forward exists for one reason only, so that when the right thing finally moves us, we move exactly, and we move in time, and we put ourselves between. I have stood the forecourt of Marrowgate for 11 years, and I expect to stand it 11 more. Most days nothing happens that anyone will film. Most days I am a still red shape in a tall black bearskin, and the children think I am switched off and the tourists wonder if I am real, and that is well, and that is the job, and I would not trade the quiet of it for any glory. But I think now, when I take my post in the cold of the early morning and the gray mare blows soft at the head of her line, and the courtyard is empty and hours, of the man who raised his hand to a horse, and of the 8 seconds it cost me to answer him, and of the truth I would leave with anyone who has ever mistaken a guardsman's stillness for a guardsman's indifference. We are not standing here because we cannot move. We are standing here because something someday will need us to, and on that day, The only thing that will matter is whether we kept enough of ourselves still and ready and unspent to come, in 5 flat strides, and stand between. She was never just a horse. He was the last to know it. And the rope, I think, will remember the red coat that turned its shoulder on the shouting man and went instead to the frightened animal, long after it has forgotten there was ever a shouting man at all.